Kevin Curry here with a knife video for you, and today I want to have a little discussion about knife size. And yes, you heard that right. I want to talk about a knife potentially being too big. Now, I know many of you would consider a lot of the knives I carry to be already too big. Um, and that's completely fine because there's absolutely a subjective element to this. However, I would like to add some reason to the whole discussion, and I'd like to point out that I do find some knives would be too big to be practically carried on a regular basis, and there are knives that I don't normally recommend. You know, if someone emails me and says or messages me and says, "Hey, Kevin, I'm looking for a great knife to carry to work every day," I'm not going to recommend something like this. Okay. Now, I will qualify this in one important way, and that is to say, I'm not really talking about fixed blades. I'll talk a little bit about fixed blades, but that would be a whole different discussion. And a lot of the things that I'm going to point out here would not apply because of the variety of uses that fixed blades can have. All right, let me start by saying the one thing I don't want to consider here is how somebody else feels about the particular knife that I happen to be carrying. You know, if I'm going to get this out. Benchmade Crooked River or the Cold Steel 8010 or the Kershaw XL Espada or the regular size Espada, which still has Kershaw Strata or the regular size Strata, which has still a 4-inch blade, right? I'm not primarily concerned about what friends or neighbors or people around me at the park or wherever I happen to be think about it, because a knife is a tool. Okay, and I carry the appropriate tool for the cutting task that I have to perform or may have to perform in terms of an EDC. I don't carry it because I know I'll be doing something, but I carry it in case I need to. All right. Um, and just as I would not ask, a friend or neighbor or a family member or someone who's having a lunch in a restaurant beside me, what they think of the hammer I'm about to use to work on my house, or the saw that I'm going to use to cut a board, or any other tool, a crowbar, or a sludge, well, whatever the case may be. I don't ask anyone's permission or care about what they think about the tools that I'm going to be using. Okay. And so I wouldn't ask about a knife either. Although if I see that there's a potential problem, I would prefer to have a conversation and educate someone about the reasons why carrying a pocket knife is important and why I'm carrying a knife of whatever size I happen to be carrying. All right. And before anyone says, what about the potential for a knife to function as a weapon? I would just point out that, a hammer, a hatchet, a crowbar, a breaker bar for your car that I have with me in my car literally every single day. All of those can serve as an extremely effective weapon, many of them more effective than a knife. All right, especially for someone who's untrained. I mean, you hit someone in the head with a hammer, they're dead, right? Where if you don't know what you're doing, lots of people have survived stabbings. And the stopping power of a knife is not there either. So anyway, that's a totally different discussion for a different day. But the point is, I don't give a lot of attention to, well, someone may think your knife is big or scary or whatever. Okay. Now, I've shown you guys a bunch of knives already. We've got the Zero Tolerance 0308. We've got the Benchmade Crooked River. We've got the Cold Steel Recon 1. I've got a few Cold Steels here. Cold Steel 8010. Of course, when we're talking about big knives, we've got the Cold Steel 4max. I just showed you, or actually I haven't, sorry. Here is the Kershaw Strata XL. As you can see, I can't even fit it in frame. We'll just put the blade in and leave it at that. I would like to hear from you guys down below what your thoughts are. Spyderco Amalgam, pretty big knife, and Spyderco doesn't do a lot of huge knives, but the Amalgam is substantially sized. So I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. When does a knife become too big? What knife, of these models, are some too big? Are some just right? And what other considerations are you making? Like, a lot of these knives are the same size, but some weigh considerably more than others. And maybe that's the primary consideration that you're giving attention to. Okay. So I'd love to hear your weigh in down below on what makes a knife too big for you. And if you're watching this, go check out the comments. You may find some worthwhile discussion down there. In fact, I'm pretty sure that you will. Now, let's move on to my personal thoughts on this. And that is, a knife should be big enough to do the job that you want to do with it. Okay? And so maybe if you're, when I was cutting shingles the other day, I carried a hook blade utility knife because that's the best knife for the job that I was doing, right? Could I have taken my Recon 1 up there and began cutting shingles with it? Well, yeah, but it would have sucked. Like, it would have been slower and, more dangerous, and just there would be no good reason to do that. Rather, a hook blade utility knife is much more suited to that role, okay? Put this guy in here as well, since he's a really good example of a big knife. So I carry the knife that I think I'm going to need, or that I can or may have the opportunity to need. All right. And so what I'm carrying a knife for is opening cardboard, cutting boxes, cutting rope, sure. Other outdoor tasks, camping tasks, food prep. I've got kids, so cutting stuff up for the kids is a pretty common use for my knives. Now, they're not little anymore, so I don't have to cut their food, but I still have to cut apples and peel oranges and stuff like that. And so a large blade, because of the reach it provides, has a lot of practicality to me, has a lot of utility, and allows me a little more flexibility. The other thing is, a larger knife brings with it some ergonomic benefits most of the time. So you can see how I've got lots and lots of grip area here, and even with that finger choil, I still have tons of blade available, which is why this happens to be one of my very favorite Spydercos. A good example, I've got the Kaiser Lan here, and it's just a little on the small side. It's not a small knife by any means, but you can see I don't have quite as much grip area. And so that's a good example of why I like larger knives. Now, I wouldn't consider this a small knife. I would still, it's on the larger end of the spectrum as well, but it kind of serves to demonstrate my point. So I think that a large, so outside of those EDC type tasks, I think a large chopper may have a place. And now I'm going to get into fixed blades just a little here, so allow me to digress just for a minute, okay? And the point I want to make here, I've got the steel wheel roamer here that I want to use to demonstrate this. This knife almost becomes a little too big as a fixed blade, because I find, right, what am I going to use this portion of the blade for? There's so little leverage here that with, like, just pinching, if I push really hard, yeah, I can hold it, but I can actually exert a lot of force just with those two fingers. Now, if I move down here, right, I can't move the knife at all. And so leverage becomes an important factor. And a knife, I find anyway, that once you get much past around 4 inches, you start to lose leverage on that blade and lose utility. Unless you're doing, food prep type of stuff where you need the reach of that longer blade, or you're going up to a large chopper. But even then, so let's get this blade back out. Imagine this blade was like 2 feet long instead of the 5 inches that it is. In this 2 feet, I'd probably end up using this portion of the blade for most of my chopping, this portion every once in a while for, when I was trying to do feather sticks or something, and you'd end up with this whole giant portion of blade completely unused, which is why I feel like you're generally better off to just carry a hatchet. Then the hatchet, right, you've noticed that the whole hatchet handle is not sharpened because you don't need it, okay? And so I don't normally go in for large choppers. There are a couple that I don't mind, and I can see the value of like a one tool option that people talk about. But generally, I'm going to prefer, a 4-inch fixed blade and a hatchet and probably a folding saw if I go out into the bush. All right. So that kind of moves that's a little brief point about fixed blades. I know, I haven't considered machetes and kukris and a bunch of stuff that, a bunch of tools that are highly useful. But when it comes to folders, okay, we're balancing between size and carry and utility, and size does need to be considered in terms of how much pocket space this is taking up. So Cold Steel Formax, Great knife, absolute tank of a knife here. But to carry this every single day all the time is probably not super practical. Even the zero tolerance 0308, which I love and which is a lot lighter than the Formax, right? It's not an ideal every single day type of carry. It's good, but it's not totally ideal. The the Strata here, again, great knife, useful, a lot of fun, and I do enjoy it. But uh, probably I'm going to end up using this portion of the blade, for doing certain tasks, and then I'm going to use the tip for a couple things. And I'm going to be carrying like this huge amount of blade that's not going to get much use. Where if I go down to the Recon One, okay, a lot of my cutting is going to happen right in here, and so I'm actually getting use out of most of the blade, even though it is on the larger side, but it's not as large as this. All right. So what are my conclusions here? I promised myself that I would try to draw a conclusion rather than just have these weird theoretical conversations. And so my conclusion would be this: probably anything much more than 4 inches and much more than 6 ounces is going to be too large for EDC for most people, even for EDC plus, right? So this knife kind of breaks those rules. And because of that, it's not that I don't carry this. I carry it purposely because I really enjoy it, but I don't carry it nearly as much as something like this. All right, because it's just a little bit unruly. So by the way, this is the Spyderco Amalgam if I didn't already mention it. So if you need a tool that's much bigger than that, you're probably doing a job that is more well suited to a fixed blade. Now, before everyone gets down there and gives me a hard time in the comments, I will say this: I hope that Kershaw keeps making giant, ridiculous knives like this. I hope that Cold Steel does, and I wish that other companies would get on board and do some of these outlandishly large knives as well. But while I say that from a kind of a fun and interesting perspective, from a practical utility perspective, I can admit that this is a little much, and so is this. All right, there you go, guys. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll talk to you soon.